Cameron Hayes stood frozen on the front porch of the sprawling brick house in Oak Park, Illinois, the same porch where 5 years earlier his father had slammed the door in his face and shouted words that still echoed in his nightmares. The lawyer had called only yesterday demanding his presence for the reading of the will, insisting it could not proceed without him. His hands shook as he rang the doorbell, the familiar chime pulling him back to a childhood filled with Sunday dinners and football games that now felt like a different lifetime. Inside, the living room smelled of lemon polish and old books, just as it always had, but the faces waiting there were cold. His mother, Linda, sat on the edge of the couch, eyes red from crying, yet her posture stiff, as if bracing for another fight. His older brother, Derek, 32, and already stepping into their father's construction business, crossed his arms and glared without a word. His younger sister, Emily, 25, stared at the floor, twisting her hands in her lap. The family lawyer, Mr. Thompson, a silver-haired man in a crisp suit, cleared his throat and opened his briefcase. "Cameron, you made it good," he said, his voice neutral but firm. "We can begin." Cameron took a seat across from them, his mind racing back to that rainy night when everything had shattered. He had come home from college for the summer, full of hope that honesty would bring them closer. At 23, he had finally found the courage to tell them about Max, the man who had become his everything during late-night study sessions and quiet walks around campus. His father, Robert, had found the messages on his phone left carelessly on the kitchen counter. The explosion had been instant. "Get out," Robert had roared, his face purple with rage. "I did not raise a son to live like that. You are no longer welcome here, you disgusting pervert." He had thrown Cameron's clothes into a bag and shoved him out into the pouring rain, the door slamming like a final judgment. Cameron had stood there soaked and shaking, dialing Max, who had driven through the storm to pick him up, whispering over and over that they would figure it out together. Now, 5 years later, Cameron had built a life in downtown Chicago with Max, a 30-year-old marketing executive whose steady kindness had carried him through the hardest days. They shared a sunny apartment overlooking Lake Michigan with weekend brunches and plans for the future that did not include this house. Cameron had become a graphic designer with a growing client list and a circle of friends who celebrated who he was. Yet the call about his father's sudden heart attack had cracked open old wounds. Max had wanted to come with him, but Cameron had insisted on facing the first part alone, promising to call if he needed backup. As Mr. Thompson began reading the standard portions of the will, leaving the house to Linda and shares of the business to Derek, Cameron felt the weight of every unspoken accusation in the room. His mother glanced at him, once her eyes flickering with something like regret before she looked away. Derek muttered under his breath something about how some people only show up when there is money involved. Emily stayed silent, but her foot tapped nervously. Cameron fought the urge to walk out the door again the same way he had 5 years ago. The internal storm raged inside him. Part of him wanted to scream that he had never stopped being their son. Another part whispered that maybe they were right, that his choices had broken the family. Society had never made it easy either. Old neighbors had whispered when the news of his coming out spread through the tight-knit suburb. A few childhood friends had stopped texting. Even at work, early on, there had been awkward silences when clients learned about his personal life. Max had been his shield through all of it, reminding him that living truthfully was worth the price. Mr. Thompson paused and pulled out a sealed envelope marked in his father's handwriting. "This is a codicil added 2 years ago," he explained, his tone shifting. "It is addressed to the entire family, and it changes things." Cameron's pulse quickened. The room grew heavier as the lawyer broke the seal and began to read aloud. The words that followed would append everything they thought they knew about the man who had once been the center of their world. The lawyer's voice cut through the silence like a blade. "To my family, I, Robert Hayes, being of sound mind, leave the following instructions beyond the main will. The bulk of my estate, including the controlling shares of Hayes Construction, the vacation property in Michigan, and the majority of my savings shall go to my son Cameron." A collective gasp filled the room. Derek shot to his feet, his chair scraping loudly against the hardwood. "What the hell is this?" he demanded, his voice rising. "This cannot be real. Dad would never do that." Mr. Thompson held up a hand calmly. "There is more, and it includes a personal letter." He unfolded the handwritten pages and continued. "Cameron, I know I failed you the night I threw you out. I was scared of what people would say, scared of the church and the business partners who would judge. I watched from afar as you built a life with Max, and I was proud even if I was too stubborn to say it. This inheritance is my way of saying I was wrong. Use it to live freely, but know that I hope one day you can forgive an old man who let fear win. The letter went on detailing how Robert had quietly followed Cameron's career through social media and even donated anonymously to an LGBT youth center in Chicago without telling anyone. Linda covered her mouth, tears streaming down her face. Derek paced the room, his fists clenched. "This is manipulation," he snarled, pointing at Cameron. "You must have pressured him somehow when he was sick. You turned him against us." Emily looked between them, wide-eyed, her earlier silence breaking. "Dad really wrote that," she whispered. Cameron sat motionless, the words crashing over him like waves. The man who had called him disgusting now admitted pride in the very life he had rejected. The moral weight pressed on his chest. Was this redemption or just another way to control from the grave? Cameron thought of Max waiting at the hotel, the man who had held him through panic attacks and job rejections when family support vanished. Max had sacrificed promotions to stay in Chicago, so Cameron would not feel alone. Now this will threaten to drag them both back into the chaos. As the family erupted into arguments, Derek accusing forgery and Linda pleading for calm, Cameron felt the old pressure return. Society had taught him that family came first no matter the cost, but his heart knew that Price had nearly broken him once. He excused himself to the backyard, the same yard where he and Derek had played catch as kids. The air was crisp with fall leaves crunching under his feet. He pulled out his phone and called Max. "The will leaves most to me," he said, his voice cracking. "Dad wrote a letter saying he regretted everything." Max's response was steady. "Breathe, Kim. This is your choice now. Whatever you decide, I am with you, but remember, the man who hurt you is not the only one who gets a say in your future." Back inside, Derek was on the phone with another lawyer, already talking about contesting the will. Linda tried to pull Cameron into a hug, but it felt forced. Emily asked quietly if he would share the money. The social fallout was already starting. Cameron's phone buzzed with a text from an old high school friend who had heard the news through the grapevine. "Is it true your dad left everything to you after what happened?" The prejudice lingered like smoke. Cameron realized that accepting the inheritance would mean facing not just family, but the entire community that had sided with his father years ago. The internal conflict tore at him. Forgiving his father felt like betraying the pain he had carried. Rejecting the money felt like punishing his mother, who had secretly sent birthday cards over the years despite her husband's rules. He made a decision in that moment to stay the night and talk more, but the cost of every choice weighed heavy. The evening dragged on with heated discussions around the dinner table that no one ate from. Derek stormed out at one point, slamming the door much like their father had done. Linda broke down, confessing that she had begged Robert to reach out, but he had been too proud. Cameron listened, absorbing every word, but his mind kept returning to Max and the life they had built away from this house. By the time he left for the hotel that night, he knew the real battle was just beginning. The next morning, Cameron woke in the hotel room to Max making coffee, the aroma filling the small space like a reminder of normalcy. "You look like you barely slept," Max said, handing him a mug. "Talk to me." Cameron recounted the will, the letter, the family's reaction. Max listened without interrupting, his face showing the quiet strength that had always grounded Cameron. "This could change everything," Max said finally. "The business is worth millions. But money comes with strings, Cam. Are you ready for that fight?" They drove back to the house together, this time Max by his side. The family was waiting in the living room again, the air thick with tension. Derek had brought his own lawyer, a sharp-dressed woman, who immediately questioned the codicil's validity, claiming Robert had been on medication that impaired his judgment. Linda looked exhausted, caught between her sons. Emily tried to mediate, suggesting they all sit down like adults. Cameron felt the societal pressure mount as neighbors peeked from windows across the street. Word had spread fast in the close-knit suburb, and already a local church group had posted vaguely about family values on social media. As the lawyers debated technicalities, Cameron retreated into his thoughts. The letter from his father had described watching Cameron's college graduation from afar, hiding in the back row. He had even attended one of Max's art shows incognito, proud of the man his son had become. The revelation shattered Cameron's image of a heartless father. Yet the damage from that rainy night remained. He remembered the months after being kicked out, sleeping on friends' couches, scraping by on part-time jobs, while Derek inherited the family expectations. The moral dilemma gnawed at him. Taking the inheritance could fund a better life for him, and Max perhaps even help other young people facing the same rejection. But it felt like blood money from the man who had made him question his worth. Max spoke up calmly, during a lull, addressing the room directly. Cameron has built a life without this money for 5 years. Whatever he decides it will be, because it is right for him, not because of pressure. Derek scoffed. Of course his boyfriend would say that. The betrayal stung when Derek later pulled Cameron aside in the hallway. You always were the favorite, even when you were the problem. Now you get to play hero with Dad's guilt money. Cameron stood his ground for the first time in years. I did not ask for this, but I will not let you rewrite history either. The confrontation left him shaking, but empowered. That afternoon, the group visited the family business office where employees whispered as they passed. The social prejudice was subtle but real. One longtime worker avoided eye contact, muttering about how things used to be. Cameron felt the weight of expectations to step into his father's shoes, yet he knew his identity would never fit the old mold. Back at the house, Linda showed him old journals where Robert had written private entries about struggling with his own views after a close friend came out years earlier and later died alone. The awakening in those pages mirrored Cameron's own journey. By evening, Cameron made a tentative decision to meet with the lawyers alone the next day to understand the full terms, including conditions that he manage the business for at least 2 years if he accepted. The night ended with Max and Cameron walking the neighborhood streets hand in hand, ignoring the stares. This is your choice, Max reminded him, but you do not have to carry it alone. The rising tension in the family promised more confrontations ahead, but for the first time Cameron felt a spark of agency amid the chaos. The following week blurred into a series of meetings and arguments that tested every boundary Cameron had built. The lawyers confirmed the will was ironclad unless proven otherwise, but Derek filed a contest anyway, claiming undue influence. Linda begged Cameron to compromise, offering to split the assets informally. Emily sided with her brother at first, then switched after reading the full letter herself. The family was fracturing further, and Cameron felt responsible, even though he had done nothing to cause it. At work in Chicago, his boss pulled him aside after hearing rumors from a client in Oak Park. "Everything okay at home?" the boss asked carefully. Cameron nodded, but the conversation left him uneasy. The social world outside the family was watching too. Old high school classmates messaged him, some supportive, some judgmental. One former teammate wrote, "You always seemed normal. What happened?" The prejudice cut deep, reminding him why he had left in the first place. Max took time off to stay with him, navigating the minefield with quiet support. They spent evenings in a hotel reviewing documents, Max pointing out clauses that protected Cameron's rights but also required public involvement in the business. The moral choice weighed heaviest at night. If he accepted, he could modernize the company, perhaps create inclusive policies that honored his father's late regret. But doing so meant facing Derek daily and risking his hard-won peace with Max. Rejecting it all would protect his identity, but leave his mother struggling with medical bills from Robert's final months. A major confrontation erupted at a family dinner Linda had insisted on. Derek accused Cameron of destroying their legacy. "You chose that lifestyle," he said, the words dripping with disdain, "and now you get rewarded." Cameron stood up, his voice steady for the first time. "I chose love, Derek. The same love you have with your wife. The difference is I was punished for it." Linda broke down, revealing that Robert had confided in her about his regrets months before the heart attack but could not bring himself to call. The revelation shifted the room but did not heal the rifts. Cameron decided to accept the inheritance with conditions of his own, including a trust for his mother and sister and a clause limiting Derek's involvement if he continued the legal fight. The sacrifice was real. He would have to commute between Chicago and Oak Park, delaying plans with Max for a bigger home. Yet the decision felt like growth, the internal awakening that he could honor the past without erasing his truth. As the week ended, the family tension simmered, but the first steps toward a new normal had begun. Months passed, and the legal battle dragged on, sapping energy from everyone. Cameron commuted weekly, managing the construction company by day and returning to Max by night. The business was struggling with lost contracts due to the family drama, but Cameron saw opportunities to rebrand it as inclusive, winning new clients who value diversity. Max supported the effort, attending meetings when he could, but the strain showed in late-night conversations. "I miss our quiet life," he admitted one evening, "but I am proud of you for facing this." The social backlash intensified when a local newspaper picked up the story, framing it as a scandal. Headlines questioned the will and implied Cameron had influenced his dying father. Old friends distanced themselves, and church members sent anonymous letters quoting scripture. Cameron read them, all feeling the weight of societal judgment, but also finding strength in messages from strangers who shared similar stories. His internal monologue evolved from doubt to resolve. He was not the villain they painted. He was a son claiming what his father had freely given. Derek escalated by leaking private family emails to the press, attempting to portray Cameron as estranged and unfit. The betrayal hurt deeply, especially when it affected Linda's health. She called Cameron in tears, asking him to drop the fight for her sake. The moral dilemma peaked. Was family harmony worth surrendering his father's final wish? Cameron met Derek alone at the office and confronted him directly. "You are fighting Dad, not me," he said. He wanted this. Derek stormed out, but the encounter planted a seed of doubt in his brother's eyes. With Max's help, Cameron started a small foundation, using part of the funds to support LGBT youth in the suburbs, the very community that had shunned him. The act brought unexpected support from former neighbors who had stayed silent before. Linda's relationship with him warmed slowly through shared lunches where she asked about Max and listened without judgment. Emily began visiting their Chicago apartment, bringing her boyfriend, and slowly accepting the reality of Cameron's life. The psychological toll was real. Cameron had nightmares of the slammed door, but woke to Max's arms and the realization that he had survived worse. The awakening was gradual. He no longer sought approval from the past. He built on it. The costs were clear: lost time with Max, temporary rifts, but the gains were a stronger sense of self and a family that was learning to evolve. As the legal case headed to mediation, the family gathered one last time at the house. Derek arrived with his lawyer, but the fight had lost steam. The mediator read the terms. Cameron proposed a fair split that honored the will while protecting everyone. Derek resisted at first, but when Linda spoke up pleading for peace, he finally relented. The betrayal had cost him 2 strained relationships and public scrutiny. Cameron reflected on the journey during a quiet walk with Max through the neighborhood park. 5 years ago, he had left broken. Now he returned on his terms. The social prejudice had not vanished entirely, but pockets of acceptance had grown. Old classmates reached out with apologies, and the business thrived under his leadership with new hires who brought fresh ideas. The internal conflicts resolved into clarity. Forgiveness was not forgetting the pain, but choosing not to let it define him. He kept the family home for Linda, but sold the Michigan property to fund the foundation. Max proposed during a sunset walk along the lake, and Cameron said yes without hesitation. The love that had sustained him through the storm now pointed to a brighter future. Yet the scars remained. Derek kept his distance, though he sent a terse congratulations on the engagement. Emily became a regular in their lives. Linda visited, often sharing stories of Robert that humanized him further. The drama had forced every member to pay a price, but it had also sparked growth. The mediation concluded with signed papers and a quiet sense of closure. Cameron stood outside the lawyer's office with Max, the Chicago skyline in the distance. The inheritance was secured, but more importantly, the family secrets were out in the open. He had chosen to manage the business part-time, allowing him to keep his design career and life with Max. The sacrifice of time was balanced by the reward of seeing the company adopt inclusive policies that would have made his father proud in the end. Socially, the town slowly moved on. Some neighbors invited them to barbecues, others kept their distance, but the overt prejudice faded. Cameron spoke at a local event about family acceptance, drawing from his experience, and received standing applause. The awakening was complete. He understood that love and identity were not choices to hide, but foundations to build upon. Derek reached out months later asking for a meeting. The conversation was awkward but honest. "I was wrong about a lot," Derek admitted. "Dad changed at the end, and I ignored it." The partial reconciliation came at a cost, but it was genuine. Linda thrived in her new role, helping with the foundation, and Emily announced her engagement, bringing the family together for a small celebration. Cameron and Max planned their wedding in a simple Chicago venue, with Linda walking him down the aisle. The day was filled with laughter and tears, the past acknowledged but not allowed to overshadow the joy. The wedding reception spilled into the evening with toasts from friends old and new. Cameron looked around the room, seeing the life he had fought for. Max stood beside him, their hands intertwined. The journey from that slammed door to this moment had been marked by pain, betrayal, and hard choices, but it had led to truth. Linda hugged him tightly, whispering that Robert would have been proud. Derek raised a glass from across the room, a small but meaningful gesture. Emily danced with her fiancé, laughing freely. As the night ended, Cameron and Max walked to their car, the city lights reflecting off the lake. The secret will had shattered the old family, but rebuilt it stronger on honest ground. Cameron had paid the price of years of isolation, but gained a deeper understanding of love and self. The drama had forced every character to face their truths and decide what mattered most. Standing at the airport months later, ready to fly to their honeymoon, Max by his side, Cameron looked back at his mother, waving goodbye, while Derek turned away, still processing. The question lingered in his mind long after takeoff. True or false? A father's final regret through a secret can truly redeem years of rejection, or does it only force the surviving family to pay the price of his silence forever?